3 months out of the 2018 Victorian state election, then Premier Daniel Andrews announced plans to build one of the most ambitious public transport projects in the world, Melbourne's 90-kilometre Suburban Rail Loop. But while some reacted to the news with great excitement, others took a more sceptical view, questioning whether the project would deliver enough benefits to justify its $100 billion price tag. But despite its detractors, the project does seem to be progressing, with the first big contract to commence tunnelling being awarded just a few days ago. So in this video, I want to look at what the Suburban Rail Loop actually is and why Melbourne needs it. I also want to see if its critics have a point, and if it's actually worth going ahead with the project. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about another very important topic: sharks. Now you might be thinking, what do sharks have to do with Melbourne's public transport? And the answer is not much, unless you're catching a tram down to the beach. But sharks are worth talking about if you're somebody who values their online data privacy. And that's because of the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark helps keep your online activity and data safe by effectively masking what you do on the web. When Surfshark VPN is active, your IP address is hidden, and all your internet traffic is encrypted, which means it can't be seen by prying eyes, online criminals, or even overly nosy governments. This is especially important these days as hackers and other cyber criminals are getting more and more advanced. On top of that, Surfshark also lets you access online content from other regions. I was lucky enough to be travelling in Greece last week, and Surfshark let me access all of my favourite shows from back in Australia that would otherwise have been geo-blocked. As a bit of an infrastructure nerd, I really can't go too long without watching an episode of Utopia. Plus, if you go to surfshark.deals/moose and then use the code MOOSE, you can get up to a massive 83% off your first subscription, and an additional 6 months free on top of that. And if you're not sure, it also comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's really no harm in trying it out. You can find a link to the deal in the description below. And now, back to trains. To understand the Suburban Rail Loop, I think we first need to look at why it's needed. While Melbourne has an extensive suburban rail network with over 200 stations being served by 16 different rail lines, these lines are entirely radial. They all stretch from the Central Business District, or CBD, out into the suburbs without ever really crossing paths. This means the network's great at taking people from their homes in the suburbs to their offices in the CBD. But if you want to travel from, say, Box Hill to Glen Waverley by train, you need to go all the way into the CBD and out again. This might have worked fine when Melbourne was a much smaller city and the tram network could provide for a lot of the cross-suburban routes. But Melbourne is now a city of 5 million people, and with plans to start developing alternatives to the very congested CBD gaining steam, better public transport between major suburban centres is greatly needed. Currently, Melbourne's inner suburbs have some non-radial tram routes, but the only real options for non-radial transport in Melbourne's middle and outer suburbs are buses. But these buses leave a fair bit to be desired, as they often have pretty poor frequencies. The route 543, for example, only runs every 40 minutes, and this is not an uncommon frequency for buses in Melbourne's outer suburbs. And some don't even run all week, like Route 503, which provides a critical east-west link in Melbourne's northern suburbs, including interchanges with multiple other bus, tram and train lines, which has no service on Sundays. On top of all of that, Melbourne's buses don't spend a lot of time in dedicated lanes, and as a result end up getting caught in traffic, making them oftentimes slow and unreliable. So this is where the Suburban Rail Loop, or SRL, comes in. It aims to provide a fast, frequent and reliable rail service linking key hubs in Melbourne suburbs, without needing travellers to make a change in the Melbourne CBD. The new line, or set of lines, will start in the southeast at Cheltenham, a station on the existing Frankston line. From here, it will travel about 7.5 kilometres in a counterclockwise circle up to Clayton, an area often suggested as a potential location of Melbourne's second CBD, and where it will provide an interchange with the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines. Then it will continue about 1.5 kilometres to a new station at Monash University, a significant employment and education precinct. After Monash, the line continues a further 4 kilometres up to Glen Waverley, with an interchange for the Glen Waverley line, and access to the significant shopping precinct at the Glen Shopping Mall. Then the line will continue 4 to 5 kilometres onto a new station at Burwood, where presumably passengers will be able to interchange with the Route 75 tram, as well as get access to Deakin University, before finally heading about 3.5 kilometres to Box Hill for an interchange with the Lilydale and Belgrave train lines and the 109 tram. This initial section of the line is called Suburban Rail Loop East, and along with the airport part of the line, will be the first to be built and is expected to open in 2035. The next phase of the project will be the Suburban Rail Loop North, and won't be expected to open until the mid-2040s at the earliest. It will run about 3.5 kilometres from Box Hill up to the major commercial and shopping precinct in Doncaster, before heading a whopping 6 kilometres to Heidelberg for an interchange with the Hurstbridge line. Then 5 kilometres up to Bundoora for access to La Trobe University and an interchange with the tram route 86, and then on 3 kilometres to Reservoir for an interchange with the Mernda line. After Reservoir, the line continues 4 kilometres to Faulkner for an interchange with the Upfield line, and then 5 kilometres to the major transport hub at Broadmeadows for an interchange with the Craigieburn line as well as the regional trains that stop at that station. Finally, the line will continue to Melbourne Airport, about 6 kilometres away, where passengers will be able to change for the upcoming Airport Rail Link. The Airport Rail Link, expected to open by 2030, will form the next part of the Suburban Rail Loop, called Suburban Rail Loop Airport, and will run from the airport via an intermediate station at Keilor East to the major transport hub of Sunshine. I've made a full video on the Melbourne Airport Rail Link if you want to know more about this section of the Suburban Rail Loop. I'll put a link to it somewhere on the screen if you're interested. The final section of the SRL is the Suburban Rail Loop West. There's currently no date set for the planned opening of this section of the line, and we really don't know that much about it. We do know that the plan is to connect Sunshine, a hub for regional rail services, as well as the suburban Sunbury line, to Werribee on the Werribee line. How it will do so and what stations will be in between, we don't know however. There are existing regional tracks that run most of the route between Werribee and Sunshine, and there has been talk that the Suburban Rail Loop West will involve the electrification of these lines to allow trains to travel down from Sunshine through the existing stations of Ardea, Deer Park, Tarneet and Wyndham Vale before connecting to Werribee. It is however worth noting that only the eastern and northern parts of the loop are intended to run as a continuous line, with passengers having to change at either the airport or Sunshine to make it the whole way round the loop. But back to SRL West, it does highlight one of the issues critics have brought up with the project, that it continues the trend of focusing public transport infrastructure spending on Melbourne's east, while the west continuously gets left behind. If the talk about electrifying the existing track in the west is true, then we're in a situation where Melbourne's east is getting a whole new underground train line, while the west is just getting a slightly upgraded version of the existing rail services. This is despite the east already being far better served by trains and trams than the west, and the west might have to wait till last to get just that. While I'm happy to see work getting started on SRL East, I would like to see more attention given to the western component, as well as more attention given to other public transport projects in the west, to help Western Melbourne's infrastructure start catching up with the rest of the city. Critics of the loop have also questioned its enormous price tag, an incredibly long time until its completion. While I don't think the high cost is enough reason to pull the plug on what could be a city-defining project, I think people are right to question why it needs to be so expensive. The Grand Paris Express project is adding 200 kilometres of new tracks to Paris's rail network, so over twice as much as the Suburban Rail Loop, for almost half the cost, at an equivalent of 57 billion Australian dollars. So one has to wonder why it has to be so much more expensive in Melbourne. There have also been criticisms of the Suburban Rail Loop's overall usefulness, but I think it's clear Melbourne's in desperate need for better orbital transport options, and by linking key precincts like Monash University, the line is sure to see at least fairly good use. That said, more could be done to improve its usefulness. For starters, there are some pretty long distances on the line without any stations, and adding a few more stations along the route could allow the line to serve greater numbers of people and connect whole new areas of Melbourne to its rail network. Between Cheltenham and Clayton, for example, the line goes for about 7 kilometres without any stops, and there are large areas in between that could benefit from rail access. There's also the issue that for the line to be useful, it needs to actually be open, and it looks like that could be ages away. Let's not let the Suburban Rail Loop take up all the oxygen in the room when there are plenty of other ways Melbourne could improve its orbital transport much faster and for much cheaper. Improving the suburban bus network immediately jumps to mind. Getting more bus routes to run at least every 15 minutes all through the week would make a huge difference. Several bus routes could also just use a full redesign to straighten out their routes. I'm looking at U681. And of course, better bus priority through dedicated lanes would help improve their reliability and speed as well. There's also the opportunity to build inter-suburban light rail lines in the middle and outer ring suburbs. There's no reason trams have to be limited to the inner city. Speaking of trams, many of the existing routes could be extended to meet the new Suburban Rail Loop stations, like extending the Route 48 to the upcoming station in Doncaster, for example. Another fun idea would be reviving the old inner and outer circle lines. Yes, Melbourne actually used to have orbital railways in the past, in the form of the inner circle line that ran from Royal Park on the Upfield line to Rushall on the Mernda line, as well as the outer circle line that ran from Fairfield on the Hurstbridge line to Oakley on the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines. Most of the rights-of-ways of these lines still exist, although some have been converted into linear parks and reserves. In fact, the Alamein line is just a remnant of the old outer circle line, but this just means they could be rebuilt cheaper without the need for extensive tunnelling. I could imagine them being rebuilt as light rail, connecting tram route 82 from Footscray to the old inner circle alignment across the inner northern suburbs, and then onto the old outer circle line's alignment through the city's east. It would undoubtedly be much cheaper and easier to build than the current Suburban Rail Loop, and could complement it by providing an inner loop to the SRL's outer loop. Ultimately, I think the Suburban Rail Loop will be an important addition to Melbourne's public transport network, filling the huge gap that is orbital transport routes. But let's not rest all our hopes on just the one project. There are many other smaller, quicker and cheaper projects that could be built without us having to wait multiple decades for the Suburban Rail Loop to finally be complete. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to know if you guys think the Suburban Rail Loop is worth pursuing, or what other transport projects could be done alongside it or even in its place. Let me know in a comment below. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Kyle, aka City Moose, thanks for watching.